Breaking tonight, new details on the very first boat strike off the coast of Venezuela last fall that raise further questions over its legality. The New York Times reporting the Pentagon used a secret aircraft painted to look like a civilian plane in its first attack on a boat that the Trump administration said was smuggling drugs, killing 11 people last September, according to officials briefed on the matter. The aircraft also carried its munitions inside the fuselage rather than visibly under its wings. The laws of armed conflict forbid combatants from feigning civilian status to fool adversaries into dropping their guard, then attacking and killing them. That is a war crime called perfidy. Joining us now, Todd Huntley, director of the National Security Law Program at the Georgetown University Law Center and a retired Navy captain. And Rachel Van Landingham, a retired lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Air Force. She is a professor of law at Southwestern Law School, Los Angeles. Both served as active duty judge advocates.
Greetings to you both. Because you were active duty judge advocates, that means you know the law. So maybe you can break some of this down for us. Let's read a little more from the reporting from the New York Times tonight. The aircraft swooped in low enough for the people aboard the boat to see it, according to officials who have seen or been briefed on surveillance video from the attack. The boat had turned back toward Venezuela, apparently, after seeing the plane before the first strike. Two survivors of the initial attack later appeared to wave at the aircraft after clambering aboard an overturned piece of the hull before the military killed them in a follow-up strike that also sank the wreckage. It is not clear whether the initial survivors knew that the explosion on their vessel had been caused by a missile attack. MS now has not independently confirmed this reporting yet, but Professor Huntley, the reading of this feels very concerning.
Yes, it is. It's very concerning. Again, one of the fundamental principles in the law of armed conflict is that you cannot use a protected status to gain a military advantage with the intent to kill or wound the enemy. That is one of the earliest things that we are taught as judge advocates when studying the law of armed conflict. And it's so basic that it's hard to believe that that was missed.
Yeah. I tell you, Professor Landingham, it just, in one sense, it's not hard to believe that it was done, though, because we've seen this administration go to extraordinary lengths in the past. And there are two thoughts that cross my mind on this story. The first is there's a reason why the international community is very, very clear, and certainly our laws are very, very clear about committing perfidy, this idea of disguising military craft to look like civilian aircraft. Very simple reason. You don't want the other side to suddenly start taking out U.S. airplanes with Americans on board, right? That's a common sense thing. We don't want you to confuse, a U.S. aircraft that's just taken off from National or from LaGuardia, right, with some type of military aircraft. So that's one thing. But the other part of it for me is what then are the consequences here? What are the possible ramifications in the international as well as the U.S. legal community, if this evidence comes further to light, and there's either a pattern of doing this or whatever else may be found from it?
Oh, thank you, Michael. You're absolutely right. I mean, this is a longstanding fundamental tenet, principle, rule of the law of war, and it's because we want our own civilians to be protected. And war divides the world between civilians who are supposed to be protected and military members who sacrifice themselves in their nation's name, right? And so when you blow those things up or combine them, that means civilians are now targets. But let's be real here. We're already in Alice in Wonderland because there was no war here. That first boat strike, the second boat strike, the 28th boat strike are strikes of murder because there is no non-international armed conflict like the administration supposedly claims, because we have yet to see the classified legal memo justifying any of this. So we're not under the law of war. So there is no perfidy. It's just all murder. But if we're going to believe the administration, that we actually are in an armed conflict by failing to adhere to what looks like failing to adhere to the fundamental principle not to engage in perfidy, not to pretend to be a civilian aircraft in order to kill people. That means we're weakening everybody's adherence to that and the trust that we have amongst the international community when we go around training armed forces around the world. Hey, follow these laws. They're good rules. They help keep our society safe and us safe. Why would anyone believe us?
Professor Huntley, I think Professor Van Landingham is getting it exactly right there and not letting us miss the forest for the trees. Because if you dig into the reporting, there are 3 sources who tell the New York Times, okay, yes, it wasn't painted the way it ordinarily should have been painted to denote that it was a military vehicle. But we want you to know the transponder was transmitting a military tail number so that it could be identified via radio signals. But if the boats do not have the equipment necessary to pick up that radio signal, then does that count? And is what I am understanding from Professor Van Landingham is like all of this would have need to be signed off on by someone, right? There isn't a lawyer who looked at all of this. And if they weren't fundamentally concerned with the baseline rationale, then all of these details, like how the plane is communicating whether or not is a military aircraft, that all in some ways, while absolutely important, becomes secondary to the bigger point, which is you have not set the legal predicate for war.
No, you're right. And Rachel is spot on. And, thinking back to my time advising commanders on operations, this is, again, something that, you should have caught. But this happens because when the Secretary of Defense, calls jag-offs and tries to ignore or just go around their advice, this is what happens. There are legitimate uses for planes like this, for surveillance, for gaining access to denied areas in some cases. But anybody who was reviewing this, any JAG reviewing this, would have then said, yes, we can now use a different platform, right? If you need the surveillance capabilities of this specific aircraft, then if we're going to carry out a lethal operation, we bring in a different platform that is clearly a military platform. But in, again, ignoring JAGs, going around experienced legal advisors, that's lost. And I have to wonder if this particular aircraft wasn't chosen to conduct the strike because it's a cool toy, right? It's something that is new. And so, it's lethal, as the SecDef would say. And so it was chosen despite the very clear legal issues that arise from its use in this manner.
Well, that leads me to a couple questions then, Professor Van Landingham. One, is this why they don't want to release the video? Because of what the people who have seen the video are now describing to the New York Times? And then secondly, to the point you made earlier, the broader point about where this all comes from, how there is no war, we do remember that the whole pretext about Venezuela came from like a PR team in Florida. You remember in Aurora, Colorado, when they said it was being overrun by Tren de Agua? That was a made-up thing by a PR firm in Colorado for the building that was having issues. They weren't keeping up with their tenants, and the president jumped on it. And we've now gotten to blowing up boats in the Caribbean and capturing the president of Venezuela from a made-up thing. It's insane.
It is quite a bit made up, except for the fact that that president of Venezuela is,
he's a bad guy.
Is a bad guy.
Yeah.
But I go back to the alleged failure to adhere to fundamental law of war. If we're going to tell our service members we're in a war, even though we're not in a war, but if we're going to tell them we're at war, we also tell them that you can look your spouses in the eye, you can look your children in the eye once you come home from that war, because you're fighting honorably by adhering to the law. So if we're going to see destruction of law up here, we're now seeing it down here, and that affects every single service member in uniform today, because it's the commander-in-chief's job and all commanders on down. to preserve the moral compass, right, to keep it on true north for their service members. So by playing fast and loose with the law at the fundamental level, we're not really at war, and we are in a pretend war, but we're not going to follow the laws of war anyway. What is that doing to our service members? There's moral corrosion going on here, and that's incredibly sad and shameful, in addition to the lives that are being lost through these murders.